I'm Claire Jennings, 33 years old, and Thanksgiving has never felt like a holiday to me. It's always been a performance. Every year my family gathers around the same polished oak table, all pretending that kindness and tradition still hold us together. But this time, as I stood in my parents' foyer with the pumpkin pie I'd baked from scratch, the air felt colder. The laughter from the dining room drifted out like background noise from a play I was no longer part of. I had the uneasy sense that this would be the year something finally broke, and that it would start with me. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever sat through a family dinner pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Growing up, my parents' house sat on a quiet street outside Columbus, Ohio, a tidy brick place with shutters my father painted himself each spring. My mom, Margaret, kept it spotless, every photo frame arranged by color and memory. In those pictures, you'd see me and my younger brother Evan in matching sweaters smiling for the camera. What you wouldn't see were the invisible lines that divided us, the ones drawn the day Mom decided Evan could do no wrong. From piano recitals to spelling bees, my efforts were met with polite nods, while his smallest accomplishments earned applause. Dad used to say I had her patience and his heart. But patience wears thin when love feels like a contest you never agreed to enter. By the time I left for college, the distance between us had stretched into something permanent. I'd studied computer science, built a career, and bought a small apartment downtown, but every holiday brought the same quiet dread. The moment I stepped through their door, I could feel myself shrinking back into the girl who had to earn her place. Mom's voice always carried that crisp sweetness that could cut you if you weren't careful, and Evan, well, he'd mastered the art of basking in her approval without seeming smug. Thanksgiving was their stage, and I was just part of the audience. That evening, the house was already alive with chatter. Aunt Doris laughed from the kitchen, Uncle Leonard was topping off wine glasses, and Evan's new fiancée, Lily, was showing off a bracelet Mom had given her just because. I hovered by the doorway holding the pie dish that no one noticed. My mother caught my eye briefly, then turned back to adjust the centerpiece cranberries pine cones and a small card that read, "Family, our greatest blessing." She didn't say hello. Instead, she asked if I'd remembered to bring whipped cream, as if that were the only reason I was there. When dinner was announced, I followed everyone to the dining room and stopped short. The table was set for 11 crystal glasses, linen napkins, name cards, and elegant script, but none with mine. At first, I thought maybe one had slipped or fallen, but the pattern was deliberate perfect. 10 names, 10 seats, one missing. My stomach tightened. I tried to laugh it off, whispering that maybe there'd been a mix-up, but no one looked up, not even Dad. In the corner stood a single folding chair, metal and bare. I carried it to the end of the table, the sound of it scraping across the floor, louder than it should have been. No one offered to help. I sat quietly filling my plate when the bowls came around, pretending not to notice that my place setting didn't match. Evan's promotion story filled the air, something about a big presentation, a client who loved his initiative. Mom's face glowed with pride. She reached over to refill his wine, her bracelets chiming softly as she said, "That's my boy." I stared down at my plate, the turkey perfectly carved, the stuffing moist and golden, and wondered when a family could look so beautiful and still feel so empty. At one point, I caught Dad's gaze. He gave me a small, almost apologetic smile before looking away again. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that he'd learned it was easier not to interfere. That was the rhythm of our family. Mom set the tone, and the rest of us stayed in key. But that night, something inside me started to slip out of tune. I felt it in the stillness of my chest, in the steady hum of conversation that didn't need me to exist. When dessert time came, Mom stood glass raised high, her eyes shining with that familiar mix of wine and self-satisfaction. The room quieted instantly. "To the only child who's truly made us proud," she said. Her voice rang clear across the table. Applause followed, loud, practiced unquestioning. Evan smiled, pretending modesty. I felt my hand tighten around my napkin, the sound of clapping fading into a hollow buzz in my ears. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the floor, and stood. My heart beat hard but steady. "Thanks," I said, meeting my mother's eyes, for finally saying it out loud. The table went still. Then I turned toward the door. The pie I'd baked sat untouched on the counter, the whipped cream melting beside it. I didn't know what would happen next, only that for the first time in years, I wasn't going to sit quietly and swallow it. As my footsteps echoed toward the hall, I heard my father's voice, low, firm, unfamiliar. "Wait," he said. "Tell them what you did." The room froze. My hand paused on the doorknob, the air thick with a silence I'd never heard before. That's where it began, the moment the truth decided to find its way out. The sound of my father's voice froze everyone at the table. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight none of us were used to. For as long as I could remember, Dad had been the quiet one, gentle, even when things got ugly. Hearing him say, "Tell them what you did," felt like the world had tilted. Every eye turned toward me, waiting. The air seemed to thicken until breathing took effort. Mom's hand tightened around her wine glass. Evan's confident smile flickered. For a long second, no one spoke, and I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. I looked at Dad. He didn't nod or motion. He just held my gaze, a steady sort of permission in his expression. That was all I needed. I turned back to the table and saw my reflection in the gold rim of my plate. "You want a toast to Evan?" I said, my voice level. "But maybe you should toast to me first." A few people laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't, because I'm the reason he got that job at Crestline PR. The sound that followed wasn't the gasp of a movie scene. It was quieter, sharper. Aunt Doris blinked mid-sip. Uncle Leonard cleared his throat. Mom spoke first. "That's ridiculous," she said, smiling tightly. "Evan was hired because he earned it." I looked straight at my brother. When there was a hiring freeze and no one was taking new applicants, I called in a favor from someone I mentored in their HR department. I cleaned up your resume, rewrote your cover letter, and made sure it landed on the right desk. Evan let out a laugh that didn't sound confident. "You're exaggerating," he said, but his eyes darted toward Dad. "I might have asked for a little help." "You didn't ask," I interrupted quietly. "You begged me. You said you didn't understand how to phrase your achievements, and I fixed it for you." My words weren't angry, just factual. "You listed great people skills as your top qualification, Evan. I made sure you even had a chance to prove it." For the first time all evening, no one looked at my brother with admiration. He stared down at his plate like he might find an escape there. Lily's hand brushed his arm, but he didn't look up. My father sat still, his face unreadable. Mom, however, recovered fast. "You always find a way to make things about you, Claire," she said, her tone suddenly clipped. "Can't you let your brother have one nice moment?" My pulse beat slow and heavy. "One nice moment," I said. "You mean like when I graduated college early and you told me not to make a fuss? Or when I won the state scholarship and you called it a cute computer thing?" I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. "Meanwhile, Evan finishes a 6-week online marketing course and you frame the certificate." Color rose in her face. "That's not the same," she snapped. "No, I said it never is." I could hear the shake beneath my words, but I didn't stop. Because around here, Evan's smallest success is a family triumph, and mine's just background noise. Silence spread like a tide. No one moved. No one tried to change the subject. It was the kind of silence that finally made space for things long buried. I could feel the sting of tears, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry in front of them, not for this. Evan shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't realize you felt that way," he muttered. "You didn't have to," I said. "That's the problem. You never had to look too closely because Mom made sure you never had to." Mom scoffed, reaching for her glass again. "You're being dramatic." The words were sharp, but there was a tremor underneath. I caught Dad's eyes again. He wasn't interrupting. He wasn't telling me to calm down. He just listened. "I'm not trying to ruin dinner," I said, my voice softening. "I just want to be seen. I've done everything I could to keep this family together, and somehow that makes me invisible." I looked around the table. When Dad got sick and couldn't work, I sent groceries every week. When the IRS sent that lien notice, I paid it off myself so you wouldn't lose the house. Aunt Doris frowned. "You paid that off?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "Every cent came from my savings." Mom's chair scraped slightly. "If you had that kind of money," she snapped, Why didn't you help when Evan's car broke down last month?" The question landed like a slap. I let out a slow breath. "Because maybe it was time someone else handled their own mess," I said. "I've spent years cleaning up after this family, and you never even noticed." Dad's voice broke through the tension, steady and clear. "You paid that lien." I nodded. His face softened with something between regret and realization. "You shouldn't have had to," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But someone had to." Mom pushed her chair back abruptly. "I need some air," she muttered, walking out of the room. Evan stood a moment later, muttering an excuse, but he didn't follow her right away. He looked at me before leaving, his face pale. The others pretended to straighten napkins or pour water. The show was over, and no one knew how to exit. I sat back down, my hands trembling just enough to make the silverware rattle. The weight that had lived in my chest for years suddenly felt lighter, not gone, but no longer mine alone. They'd heard me. They couldn't unhear it now. A few minutes passed before I stood and slipped out to the porch. The night air was sharp with November cold, but it felt clean against my skin. For once, I could breathe. I was halfway down the steps when I heard the door creak open behind me. "Claire, wait." It was Evan's voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it. He stepped out, hands shoved in his pockets. I need to tell you something," he said, hesitating. I didn't answer, just turned to face him. He looked younger somehow, like the confident man at the table had been peeled away. "I knew," he said finally. "About the job. Not at first, but I overheard someone mention your name after I got the offer. I knew you were behind it." My stomach tightened. "And you didn't say anything." He looked down. I wanted to believe I'd earned it. I told myself it didn't matter, but when Mom started calling me her success story, I didn't correct her. He swallowed hard. "You didn't just get erased, Claire. I helped erase you." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. He went on before I could answer. "That's not the only thing. There's something else you need to know." I waited. His breath fogged in the cold air. "Mom's planning to sell the house. She's already talking to a realtor. She wants it done before the end of the year." The words hit harder than any insult at that dinner table. Without telling Dad, I asked. He nodded. "She says the deed's in her name from before the refinance. She's planning to move in with Aunt Doris for a while, says she needs a fresh start." I stared past him at the dark windows glowing with warm light, the same house I'd emptied my savings to protect. "She was going to blindside him," I whispered. Evan nodded, shame etched across his face. "I couldn't keep it from you anymore," he said. "Not after what you said in there." I didn't answer right away. My thoughts spun through all the quiet sacrifices, all the times I'd chosen to stay silent, because I thought keeping peace was the same as keeping family. The sound of the front door opening broke through my thoughts. Dad stood in the doorway, his jacket draped over one arm. He looked from me to Evan, then said simply, "Come inside. There's something we need to talk about." His voice was calm but steady, the kind that carried years of patience reaching its limit. I glanced at Evan. His shoulders slumped, but he nodded. We followed Dad back toward the light spilling from the dining room. The laughter gone now, the clinking of dishes replaced by a silence that felt heavier than before. When we stepped back inside, I knew the night wasn't over. Something was still waiting to be said, something that would change everything again. The moment we stepped back into the dining room, the air felt different. The warmth from the candles had faded, replaced by a heavy stillness that settled between every chair. Most of the family sat with folded hands, eyes down, pretending to fix plates that were already empty. The laughter and music that had filled the house an hour ago were gone. Only the clock over the fireplace ticked sharp and hollow. My father walked past the table to where my mother usually sat the head of it and stood there instead. For the first time in my life, he didn't look like he was asking permission to speak. Mom returned a minute later, her face cool, her lipstick smudged at the corner of her mouth. She looked at him like he had taken something from her just by standing there. "David," she said, setting her wineglass down, "if this is about Claire's outburst." He raised his hand, quiet but firm, and she stopped mid-sentence. "This isn't about outbursts," he said. His tone wasn't angry. It was something heavier, like every word carried the weight of years he'd stayed quiet. "This is about what we've allowed to happen in this family." I stayed near the doorway, not sure if I should sit or keep standing. Evan lingered behind me, his hands buried deep in his pockets. Mom crossed her arms, the light from the chandelier glinting off her bracelets. "David, you're being dramatic." "We're fine." He shook his head slowly. "No, Margaret. We're not fine. We've been pretending." His gaze moved around the table, resting on each person who had clapped during her toast. I let silence do the work of truth for far too long. Tonight, that stops. No one spoke. You could almost hear the sound of the wind pressing against the windows. He turned to me, then his voice gentler. "Claire has carried more of this family than any of you realize," he said, "and I'm the one who should have said it years ago." My mother exhaled sharply, ready to interrupt, but he didn't give her the chance. "When I was recovering from surgery, she was the one who kept the lights on. When the IRS came after the house, she paid off the lien. She saved this home, quietly." Gasps rippled across the table. Aunt Doris covered her mouth. Uncle Leonard stared at his plate. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me, and for once I didn't shrink under it. I stayed still. Mom's voice came out brittle. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter who told me," Dad said. "What matters is that I know now." He reached into his jacket and placed a manila envelope on the table. The sound of it landing broke the silence. "I spoke to our lawyer this morning," he continued. "As of next month, this house will be in both our names, mine and Claire's." The shock around the table was immediate. "You're giving her—" "The house." Mom's voice cracked as she rose from her chair. "I'm giving her what she already saved," he said simply. Her face drained of color. "You can't do that. My name is on the deed." "It was," he said, pulling out another folded paper. "When you signed over financial control during the refinance, you also gave up your claim to act without my consent. You never read the fine print." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Her expression faltered, first confusion, then disbelief, then something closer to fear. "You tricked me," she whispered. "I protected our home," he replied, "the same way our daughter did." Aunt Doris shifted uneasily as if wishing she could disappear. "Maybe we should all calm down," she said softly. Dad turned toward her, polite but firm. "No, Doris. This isn't something we smooth over with pie and polite talk. Not this time." His eyes swept over the table again. "You all sat here and watched my wife humiliate our daughter, and I said nothing. That's on me. I let silence become permission." His voice broke slightly, just enough to pull a sting through the room. Claire deserved better from all of us. Evan lowered his head. Lily placed her hand gently on his arm, but he didn't move. He looked older, smaller somehow. Mom still stood at the other end of the table, her expression shifting between anger and disbelief. "This is absurd," she said, her tone rising. "I've done everything for this family while you've worked and stayed out of it. I've managed the home, the bills. You've done everything except listen," Dad said. "To me, to Claire, to anyone but yourself." Her eyes flashed. "So what she wins now?" I met her gaze. "This was never about winning," I said quietly. "I just wanted to stop disappearing in my own family." For the first time that night, her expression softened, but only for a moment. Then she looked away, lips pressed tight. "You've all lost your minds," she muttered and turned toward the hallway. Her heels clicked sharply across the hardwood before fading into silence. No one followed her. Dad remained standing, though he looked suddenly older, the weight of the evening settling into his shoulders. "I know I'm late," he said quietly, turning to me, "but I'm here now." My throat tightened, but I managed a small nod. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded back. "You deserve to feel like this home belongs to you, not because your name is on paper, but because your heart always was." No one spoke for a long while after that. The crackle from the fireplace filled the space where conversation should have been. Around us, the family that had always seemed so unshakable looked smaller, unsure of what to do next. Aunt Doris stood murmuring something about heading out early. Uncle Leonard followed. Chairs creaked as others gathered coats, their movements slow and subdued. No one met my eyes. When the door finally closed behind the last guest, the house felt different. Still the same walls, the same furniture, but lighter somehow, like it could finally breathe. Evan stayed behind, standing near the kitchen doorway. He picked up a few plates, stacking them quietly. "I'll help," he said. His voice didn't carry its usual confidence. There was no performance left in it, only sincerity. Together we cleared the table in silence. After the last dish was rinsed, he handed me a mug of coffee. "I don't know if I can fix all of this," he said, eyes lowered, "but I want to try." He hesitated, then added softly, "Not just because I feel bad. I miss having a real sister." I took the mug. The steam curled between us, faint and warm. "We'll see," I said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Dad poured himself a small glass of wine, then another for me. We didn't toast. We didn't need to. The silence that lingered wasn't heavy anymore. It was the quiet that comes after a storm when the air feels washed clean. Outside, wind brushed against the windows, and the first snow of the season began to fall. For the first time in years, the house felt like it might finally belong to the people who cared enough to fight for it. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how long it would take to rebuild what was broken. But I knew this much: the truth had finally found its voice, and it wasn't leaving. By the time the last guest left, the house had gone quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The scent of turkey and cinnamon lingered, mixed with the cool air drifting in through the cracked kitchen window. Dad sat at the table nursing his wine, while Evan and I stood by the sink, rinsing the last of the plates. The clinking of dishes sounded almost too loud in the silence. Every few minutes, Dad glanced toward the doorway, as if half expecting Mom to return, but she didn't. Her car was gone. He finally set his glass down. "You both should get some rest," he said. "It's been a long day." His voice was tired, but not defeated. When I didn't move, he added, "We'll figure out what comes next in the morning." Evan nodded, his shoulders still tense. I could tell he wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. He gave me a small nod goodnight and went upstairs to the room he used to stay in. When his door clicked shut, I turned to Dad. "You meant it, didn't you, about putting my name on the house?" He looked up, his eyes steady. "I did. This home should belong to the people who fought to keep it standing." His tone was gentle, but the finality in it left no room for doubt. "I'll talk to the lawyer first thing Monday." I wanted to thank him, but no words felt right. After everything that had been said, gratitude didn't quite fit. Instead, I gave a quiet nod and reached for my coat. "I'll be back tomorrow," I said. "There's still a lot to clean up." The drive home was slow. The streets were mostly empty, the lights from the last few open shops reflecting off wet pavement. My apartment had never felt so still. I set my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and sat by the window, watching the city's faint glow fade behind drifting clouds. The adrenaline from the night finally ebbed, leaving behind something else, an ache that was less about anger and more about release. The next morning, I woke to a text from Dad. "We need to talk. Can you come by?" I was out the door in 10 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, his truck was parked where it always had been, but Mom's SUV was back too. My heart sank. She was standing by the front porch, wrapped in a wool coat, arms crossed tight. Her makeup was perfect again, her face composed. "I thought you might show up," she said. "Your father won't listen to me." I hesitated. "Listen about what?" She looked toward the living room window where the curtains had been drawn. "About undoing this nonsense, about the house, about you inserting yourself into something that isn't yours." Before I could reply, Dad opened the door. "Margaret," he said quietly enough. She turned, but didn't step inside. "You can't just give away what's ours." "David," she said, "you're letting her drive a wedge in this family." He met her glare calmly. "There's no wedge, Margaret. There's just truth." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mom shook her head. "You'll regret this," she said. Her voice cracked slightly as she turned toward her car. "You both will." The tires crunched over the gravel as she pulled away. Inside the house felt colder than usual. Dad sat down at the table, rubbing his temples. "She came home this morning demanding I reverse everything he said. Threatened to move in with your aunt for good." I sat across from him. "Maybe that's what she wants." He sighed. "Maybe. But I think she just doesn't know what to do when she's not in control." He reached into a folder on the table and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This came last night. The lawyer already filed the transfer paperwork. It'll take a few weeks, but it's official. Seeing my name typed beside his made something tighten in my chest. Not triumph, just a quiet kind of validation. "Thank you," I said softly. "You don't owe me thanks," he replied. "I should have done it sooner." A knock at the door broke the stillness. Evan stepped inside his coat dusted with frost. "She called me," he said, closing the door. "Said she's staying with Aunt Doris for now." Dad nodded slowly. "I figured as much." Evan set a manila envelope on the counter. "She asked me to give you this." Inside were several property listings, mostly small condos near the city. A note was scribbled across the top, "Moving forward. Don't call." Dad stared at it for a long moment, then slid it aside. "Let her move forward," he said quietly. "We'll stay here." The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. The house once filled with tension seemed to exhale. Dad fixed the loose banister on the stairs. Evan replaced a cracked tile in the kitchen. Lily stopped by with groceries and coffee, careful not to intrude, but determined to help. I spent my evenings sorting through old boxes, school photos, faded letters, and bits of the past that still smelled faintly of dust and time. One night, while we were packing a box of Mom's porcelain figurines, Evan glanced up. "You think she'll come back?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not unless she decides to face what she's done." He nodded, turning one of the tiny glass birds over in his hand. "She always said those were her mother's. Maybe they'll mean something again someday." We worked in silence for a while. The air between us was softer than it had been in years, not healed, but beginning to mend. A week later, Dad called a family meeting. It wasn't a grand announcement, just coffee at the dining table, the three of us sitting where the chaos had started. "The paperwork's moving faster than expected," he said. "Once it's finalized, Claire and I will co-own the property. That means decisions about repairs, taxes, anything. She and I handle it together." Evan nodded. "That's fair." Dad looked at him. "I don't want you to feel left out, son, but this house stays in the hands of the person who protected it." "I understand," Evan said. His tone was quiet, sincere. "It's where it belongs." For a moment the air felt still again, but not heavy this time, just peaceful. Later that night, after Dad went to bed, I found myself sitting by the kitchen window, the house dark except for the glow from the porch light. Snow had started to fall again, the flakes swirling through the light before disappearing into the dark. Evan joined me, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. He slid one toward me. "You ever think things could have been different?" he asked. I stared out at the snow. "Maybe. But sometimes you can't fix the past, you just stop letting it define you." He gave a slow nod. "I'm trying to learn that too." The sound of the clock filled the quiet, steady, and calm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place at the table. It was mine, finally. Not because someone handed it to me, but because I stayed when it mattered. When I left later that evening, I looked back through the car window. Dad's light was still on upstairs. The house looked the same from the outside, aged wood-faded shutters, but it felt alive again. Not perfect, not untouched, but real. Something told me the hardest part wasn't over yet. But as the snow thickened across the road ahead, I felt ready to face whatever waited next. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, the house looked different. The Christmas wreath still hung on the front door, but its red ribbon had faded from the cold. Mom's favorite decorations were gone, the porcelain angels, the silver garland packed into boxes in the attic. What remained was simpler, quieter. Dad had strung a single row of lights across the porch and called it good enough. Inside, the air felt lighter, even if it still carried traces of everything we'd said. Dad sat at the dining table sorting through bills while I brought in a folder from the lawyer's office. The papers were ready, our names listed side by side, the property title officially shared. "It's done," I said, setting the folder down. He smiled faintly. "Guess we can finally stop holding our breath." Evan came in a few minutes later, shaking snow from his coat. "Mr. Reed called me," he said, glancing between us. He wanted to confirm Mom's forwarding address, said she requested a copy of the transfer papers. Dad frowned. She doesn't need a copy. She said she wanted proof. Evan replied quietly. That it's real. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. She'll see what she wants to see. I could tell he was tired. The past 2 weeks had aged him, though there was a kind of peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Let her have it, I said softly. She can't undo it now. He nodded. You're right. He leaned back in his chair. I just wish she'd care more about what's left between us than what's written on a piece of paper. We spent the rest of the morning sorting through old boxes, things Mom had refused to throw out but never used. Wedding china, family albums, old Christmas cards addressed to the Jennings family. The handwriting changed over the years, but the name stayed the same. At one point, Dad found a photo of the 4 of us at the lake from when I was little. I was maybe 10, holding a fishing pole, grinning with missing teeth. Mom had her arm around Evan, both smiling toward the camera, while I stood slightly apart just outside the frame of their closeness. Dad studied it for a moment before sliding it into the keep pile. By afternoon, Evan offered to drive into town for groceries. I stayed behind wrapping gifts at the kitchen table. It was strange planning Christmas without the person who had always insisted on making it perfect. The house wasn't quiet in a lonely way, it was just still. The phone rang once. Dad answered, listening without saying much, then handed it to me. It's your mother, he said. Her voice was steady but distant. I hear congratulations are in order, she said. You finally got your name on something. I hesitated. I didn't get it, Mom. I earned it. That's what your father said, she replied, a hint of bitterness in her tone. He's always had a soft spot for you, even when you didn't deserve it. I exhaled slowly. You don't have to do this. Do what she asked. Turn every conversation into a contest, I said quietly. It's over. You made your choices and we made ours. She was silent for a moment. You think you've won something? She said finally. But when you take away control from someone, don't be surprised when they stop caring. The line clicked before I could answer. I stared at the receiver for a long time before setting it down. Dad looked up from across the room. Everything okay? She's angry, I said. She'll stay that way until she finds someone else to blame, he replied. Don't let it be you. That night, snow covered the yard in a clean white sheet. Evan returned with groceries and coffee, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. He set the bags down and leaned against the counter. I saw her, he said quietly. At the store. I looked up. What did she say? Not much. Just that she's planning to sell her jewelry. Said she wants to start fresh somewhere near the coast. He hesitated, then added, She looked different, Claire. Not angry, just tired. I didn't know what to say. For years, Mom had been the force that kept everything moving, demanding, directing, shaping every detail of our lives. Hearing she looked tired didn't feel like triumph. It felt like the end of something that had burned too long. Dad poured coffee into 3 mugs and motioned for us to sit. Whatever she does, we'll manage, he said. We're still family. We sat together in the glow of the kitchen light, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Evan reached for one of the photos we'd found earlier, the one at the lake, and set it in the center of the table. We didn't look broken back then, he said. Dad smiled faintly. That's the thing about pictures. They show how people want to remember themselves, not what's really happening. Evan nodded slowly. I'd like to make new ones. Maybe ones that don't need pretending. I met his eyes. Then start by being part of the truth, I said. The following week, we invited Lily and her parents for dinner. It wasn't a big occasion, just roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, but it felt like the first normal meal we'd had in years. Lily's parents, Tom and Nancy Carter, were warm and easygoing, quick to laugh, careful with words. Midway through dinner, Lily reached over and squeezed Evan's hand. You seem lighter, she said softly. He smiled, not looking at her, but at Dad. I think we're all trying to be. Later that night, after everyone left, I stepped out onto the porch. The snow had stopped, leaving the sky clear and wide. Through the window I could see Dad turning off lights, Evan washing dishes, the quiet rhythm of ordinary life returning. I thought about everything that had led here, the years of silence, the fights swallowed for the sake of peace, the moment at that table when the truth finally broke free. It wasn't perfect now, but it was honest. Behind me, the door opened and Dad stepped out, hands tucked into his coat pockets. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "just thinking." He nodded, following my gaze toward the dark street. "You know, when your mother and I first bought this place, I thought it would be our forever home," he said. "Now I think maybe it was meant to be yours." I didn't answer right away. The porch light flickered against the snow, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing outside looking in. "Thank you," I said finally. He smiled. "Don't thank me, Claire. Just live here the way it deserves." Inside, the clock chimed softly, marking the hour. The sound was steady, grounding the same as it had been my entire life. But this time, it didn't feel like a reminder of what was missing. It felt like a beginning. As I turned off the porch light and followed Dad inside, I knew something had shifted for good. Not just in the house, but in all of us. And though winter still lay ahead, it finally felt like spring wasn't too far away. Winter deepened fast that year. The yard stayed covered in snow for weeks untouched, except for the tracks left by Dad's boots when he went out to fill the bird feeders. The mornings had grown quieter, but not in the way they used to be. There was peace now, not tension. We were learning how to breathe again. I came by every weekend to help him around the house, bringing groceries and making sure he didn't spend too much time out in the cold. On one of those mornings, he waved from the porch as I pulled into the driveway, his breath visible in the air. "You're just in time," he said. "Mrs. Porter brought pie. She says I'm looking too thin." I smiled. Mrs. Porter had been their neighbor since before I was born. She lived alone now, but made it her mission to keep up with everyone on the street. When I stepped inside, her voice carried from the kitchen. "Claire, honey, I made apple crumb. None of that store-bought nonsense." She hugged me tight, the scent of cinnamon clinging to her coat. "Your father looks better," she said quietly. "That's your doing." I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to hear as he set out plates. "It's both of us," I said. She smiled knowingly, then tapped my cheek before heading for the door. "You two take care of each other," she said, "and remember, people notice when the right ones start shining again." When she left, Dad chuckled. Helen always did have a way with words. We ate the pie by the window, watching snow drift off the pine branches. "You've been good to me," he said after a moment, "and to this house. Feels different now." "It feels honest," I said. He nodded. "Honest is better than perfect." The following Monday, I stopped by after work to drop off some forms from the lawyer. The title transfer had been finalized. The last of the paperwork just needed his signature. As I walked in, the living room lights were dim, and a single envelope sat on the coffee table. Dad came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands. "She stopped by," he said quietly. It took a second for me to understand. "Mom." He nodded. "Didn't come in. Just left that." The envelope was plain unsealed with my name written on the front in her handwriting. Inside was a folded letter and a small photograph of us from years ago, the same one from the lake, only this time cropped so that it was just her and Evan. The letter was short. "You have what you wanted. Take care of your father. I'll find my own peace somewhere else." There was no signature, no warmth, just those two sentences. I set it down carefully. "She's selling her jewelry," Dad said. "And from what I hear, she's already met with a realtor in Wilmington." "That's a long way to go," I said quietly. He looked at me, sadness flickering in his eyes. "Maybe that's what she needs." We didn't talk much after that. I helped him with the forms, and when he signed the last page, he exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding that breath for years. "There," he said. "Done for good." By February, things began to settle. Evan and Lily had moved forward with their wedding plans, keeping it small, just a ceremony at the courthouse followed by dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. He called one night to ask if I'd stand with him. "Not as a bridesmaid," he said, laughing nervously. "Just as my sister." I said yes. The ceremony was simple, tender, in a way that felt genuine. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I caught Dad's small grin across the room. For the first time, a family moment didn't carry hidden tension. It was just us, imperfect, still learning, but real. Afterward, during dinner, Lily's parents thanked me for coming. Her mother, Nancy, reached for my hand. "You raised a good man," she said softly. I smiled. He did that part himself. Evan overheard and laughed. "Barely," he said. "But I'm learning." That night, as I walked to my car, snow began to fall again, gentle flakes spinning through the glow of the streetlights. Evan caught up to me before I reached the parking lot. "You know he said I called Mom last week." I turned. "Did she answer?" He nodded. "We didn't talk long. She said she's renting a place by the water." Didn't sound happy, but she didn't sound angry either. She asked about Dad. "About you." "What did you tell her?" "The truth," he said. "That things are better now. That maybe she should try calling someday." I watched his breath hang in the air before fading into the cold. "Do you think she will?" He shrugged. "I think she's scared to find out we're doing fine without her." I didn't respond. There was nothing cruel in his words, just an understanding we both shared. Some wounds weren't about anger anymore. They were about absence. The weeks that followed brought a quiet rhythm to everything. I spent more time at the house than I expected, helping Dad plan repairs for spring. We patched drywall, repainted the hallway, and even replaced the porch railing together. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found a stack of Mom's notebooks, lists of expenses, dinner plans, reminders for holidays. She had organized everything, even her control. I carried them downstairs. Dad looked at the pile and sighed. "You can throw them out," he said. "They belong to another time." I set them aside instead. "Maybe not yet." He smiled faintly. "You've always had more patience than me." That evening we sat on the porch with mugs of coffee as the last light faded. "You ever think she'll come back?" I asked. "Not the way you mean," he said. "People like your mother don't return to places, they return to memories. And sometimes the memory's enough." I nodded, watching as the first stars appeared. "Do you ever regret it? Letting her go?" He took a long breath before answering. "I regret waiting so long to see things clearly," he said. "But no, I don't regret where we are now. I see you, Claire, and I see Evan trying. That's enough for me." His voice carried the calm weight of truth. For once, there was no bitterness beneath it, no regret disguised as nostalgia, just acceptance. As I drove home later that night, the sky stretched wide and silver above the highway. I thought about what he said about how people return to memories. Maybe that was what this house had been all along, not just a place, but a memory we'd been trying to repair. And now finally, it was starting to hold again. When I pulled into my apartment lot, a message buzzed on my phone. It was from an unknown number. "Claire, it's me. I'm sorry." "Mom." The words were small, almost tentative, like someone testing cold water before stepping in. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there watching the snow drift under the streetlight, letting the silence stretch. Something in me knew the story wasn't done yet. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The message stayed on my phone for 3 days before I answered. "I'm sorry." That was all she had written, but it felt heavier than anything she had said in years. I must have read it 100 times before replying with just 2 words. "Are you okay?" Her response came hours later. "I'd like to talk. Just you and me." When I told Dad, he didn't say much at first. He was sanding a piece of oak for one of his clients, the rhythm of his work steady and calm. "If you want to meet her, you should," he said finally, "but make sure it's on your terms." So I did. We agreed to meet halfway between her new town and ours, a quiet cafe off the highway near Wilmington. The morning was cold, the kind that made your breath visible, even after the heater had been running for miles. I parked outside the cafe and saw her through the window before she saw me. She looked smaller somehow. Her hair was shorter, her makeup lighter. She sat alone with both hands wrapped around a mug as if steadying herself. When I walked in, she stood halfway uncertain whether to hug me. We settled for a quiet nod. "You look good," she said softly. "You too," I answered, though the words felt strange. We ordered coffee, and for a few minutes neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't tense, it was careful. Finally she looked up. "I owe you more than a text," she said. "I've had a lot of time to think, and I need you to know I'm not angry anymore." I didn't respond, just let her keep going. "I thought control meant love," she said. "I thought keeping things perfect was how you kept people close, but all I did was push everyone away." She traced the rim of her cup. "I told myself for years that I was protecting this family, but really I was protecting myself from feeling small from being wrong." Her voice wavered and she stopped to breathe. "When your father put your name on that deed, I wanted to hate him. I told myself you'd stolen something from me. But when I left, I realized the only thing I'd lost was my own peace." I let her words settle between us before I said quietly, "You hurt a lot of people, Mom." "I know," she said, "and I can't take it back, but I want to make things right even if it's too late to be family the way we were." It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard her say. We talked for nearly 2 hours, mostly about small things, the weather, the coast, the books she'd been reading. Nothing heavy after that first admission. When it was time to leave, she reached into her bag and slid a small envelope across the table. "These belong to you," she said. Inside were a few of my childhood photos, the ones that had been missing from the albums. I turned one over and saw her handwriting on the back. "My little spark." "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I hope one day we can sit like this again and not feel like strangers." I nodded. "We can start here." When I stepped outside, the sky was pale blue, the air biting at my cheeks. I watched her car pull away and disappear down the highway. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like the beginning of something quieter, an understanding maybe. That night I told Dad everything. He listened, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. "Sounds like she's finally facing herself," he said. "I think she's trying," I said. "She seemed softer." He nodded. People change when they run out of places to hide. He didn't say more, and he didn't need to. There was no gloating in his voice, no victory, just acceptance. A few days later, Evan came by with Lily. They brought dinner and stayed to help patch a leak in the roof. Over takeout containers and coffee, he told us about their plans to buy a small house nearby. "I want Dad to teach me some of his tricks," he said with a grin. Dad chuckled. "You mean actual carpentry or how to fix a pipe with nothing but tape and faith?" "Both," Evan said. The laughter came easy that night. It was the kind of evening that used to feel impossible, like real, without walking on eggshells. When they left, Lily hugged me tightly. "You have a good family," she said softly. I smiled. "We're learning how to be one." The following weekend, I drove to the coast. It wasn't planned. I just needed to see the ocean. I parked near the boardwalk and walked until the cold air turned my fingers numb. The sound of the waves was steady grounding. I thought about Mom living somewhere nearby, probably looking at the same horizon. Maybe that was enough for now. When I got home, the mailbox held a small brown envelope with her handwriting again. Inside was a check, made out to Dad, not large, but enough to mean something, with a note that read, "For the house. Thank you for taking care of it when I couldn't." I left it on the counter for him to find. When he saw it, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer with the important papers. "I'll cash it," he said finally. "But not for me. I'll put it toward the roof repair. Let her be part of it in some way." It was such a simple gesture, but it felt right. No bitterness, no revenge, just balance. That evening we sat by the fire. The house creaked softly as the temperature dropped outside. I thought about everything that had changed in just a few months: the confrontation, the confession, the slow unraveling of years of silence. It wasn't neat or perfect, but it was honest. Dad broke the quiet first. "You did good, Claire," he said. "You handled that better than I could have." "I just told the truth," I said. He nodded. "That's all any of us can do." When I looked around the living room, the same space that had once felt like a battleground, I saw something new. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. The walls still held echoes of arguments and quiet tears, but they also held laughter now and light. The clock above the mantel chimed softly, marking another hour gone. For once it didn't feel like time slipping away. It felt like healing taking its shape one honest moment at a time. Before I left that night, Dad handed me a small box. "She dropped this off years ago," he said. "I kept it in case you ever wanted it." Inside was my old silver locket, the one Grandma had given me when I was 15. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. The chain was tarnished, but the engraving was still clear. "To my brave girl." I closed my hand around it. "Thank you," I whispered. When I stepped outside, the air was cold enough to sting, but I didn't rush to the car. I stood there a moment watching the lights through the window, the home that had once been fragile, now glowing steady and warm. Something in me knew we were finally stepping out of the past for good. But there was one thing left to face, the last piece of truth waiting to be spoken. The next morning, the world looked softer. Sunlight poured through the frost on the window, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt lived in, warmed by something that had survived every kind of storm. Dad was in the kitchen making coffee when I walked in, humming an old tune under his breath. He looked up, smiling. "Morning, kiddo," he said. "You're early." I couldn't sleep. I told him, reaching for a mug. The locket from last night was still in my pocket, cool against my hand. He noticed it when I set it on the counter. "Your grandma would have liked seeing you wear that again," he said. "She always said it would come back to you when you were ready." I fastened it around my neck. The metal was worn, but it caught the light just the same. "I think it finally did," I said. We spent the morning quietly him fixing the loose cabinet hinge while I dusted the shelves. It was ordinary, in the best way, no tension, no unspoken weight between us. Just the quiet rhythm of two people who had finally found peace. Later that afternoon, Evan stopped by with Lily. They'd been married a month now, still glowing in that new beginning. He handed Dad a folded piece of paper. "It's from Mom," he said. "She mailed it to our place. Thought it should come here." Dad opened it carefully, eyes scanning each line before passing it to me. The note was short. "I drove past the old street last week. The house looked warm again. Thank you for keeping the light on. Margaret." None of us spoke for a moment. There was no anger left, just quiet understanding. Dad finally nodded. "She's finding her way," he said. "That evening we had dinner together. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and vegetables." We sat in the same dining room where everything had once fallen apart, and somehow it felt new. Evan told stories about work. Lily shared plans for their small business. We laughed more than we had in years. When Dad raised his glass, he didn't make a speech. He just looked around the table, his voice steady. "To family," he said. "The kind you build and rebuild no matter how long it takes." After they left, the house went quiet again, but it wasn't lonely. I stood by the window looking out at the snow-covered yard. The light from the porch reflected off the ice, and I could see the faint outline of footprints, the same path Dad took each morning to feed the birds. For a moment, I thought about everything that had happened, the forgotten chair at Thanksgiving, the words that had finally broken the silence, and the truth that had rebuilt what lies once buried. We hadn't fixed everything, but maybe that wasn't the goal. Maybe it was enough that we had finally stopped pretending. The next day I visited Mom. She was renting a small cottage near the water, quiet and bright, with seashells lined along the windowsill. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, but not uneasy. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. We talked for a while about simple things, safe things. She told me she'd started painting again, landscapes mostly. There were 2 on the wall, both of the ocean at different times of day. "You always loved the sea," she said. "I guess I finally see why." Before I left, she handed me a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. "For the house," she said. "It's not much, but it's something I made." I thanked her and promised to hang it in the hallway. When I got home, Dad was reading by the fire. I unwrapped the canvas and held it up. It was a painting of a sunrise over calm water, simple but full of light. "She painted this," I said. He looked at it for a long time. "Then let's give it a place," he said. We hung it in the hallway, right where the morning sun would touch it first. Standing there, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, but it lets you stop carrying it. It gives the story a different ending, one where peace matters more than pride. That night, I stayed later than usual. The house was quiet, except for the ticking clock and the wind brushing against the windows. When I finally stood to leave, Dad said softly, "You did good, Claire. You gave this family back its voice." I smiled, pulling on my coat. "We all did," I said. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face sharp and clean. The porch light flickered, casting a glow across the snow. Behind me, the house stood steady, ours again in every way that mattered. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or perfect reunions. Sometimes they end with understanding, with people doing their best to live better than before. And maybe that's what justice really looks like, choosing peace after all the noise. If you've ever had to rebuild something broken or find your place after being overlooked, I hope you remember this truth has a quiet power. It might shake everything at first, but it always makes room for light. Thanks for listening to my story. Take a moment before you go, breathe, reflect, and if it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone.